Waitress feeds homeless man daily completely unaware of who he is. When the homeless man revealed who he really was, her boss face twisted in horror. She watched the smug sneer slide right off his face as the realization dawned on him. He hadn't just lost his reputation, he had lost everything, and he knew it. She had never dreamed that a simple act of kindness would have so many consequences. But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. Tracy Bam from California had big dreams, but they would have to wait. Working long shifts as a waitress was just enough to pay the bills, and she barely had enough time to attend her nighttime classes. Still, today she was thankful for what she had. After all, her situation could be a lot worse. Tracy noticed a homeless man who had been sitting outside the restaurant she worked at. He'd been there a few days now, and seeing him broke her heart. Maybe it was the way he shared his food with the stray cats and dogs in the alleyway, or the way he always smiled and greeted her when she walked past. There was something about him that touched her deeply. She wanted to help, but her boss would try to put a stop to that. Tracy worked as a waitress at one of California's most prestigious restaurants. The chef had 2 Michelin stars under his belt and was determined to keep them. He was also the owner. Although his food was excellent, he had an inflated ego, refused to delegate, and micromanaged his staff with an iron fist. He was the stuff of nightmares. As long as Tracy stayed out of his way, it suited her just fine. Although she loved working around food, her job was a means to an end. The experience she was getting in the Michelin star restaurant was invaluable. But when she saw the homeless man who had taken up residence outside, working in such a high-end restaurant was also a major source of guilt for Tracy. Rich diners would arrive dressed to the nines and had no qualms about dropping hundreds of dollars for the most lavish meals. Tracy couldn't bear the thought that, while the rich dined out and ordered champagne, a homeless man slept just a few feet away on the street with an empty belly. At first glance, the homeless man looked like any other man who had fallen on hard times. But Tracy noticed that he always greeted everyone who passed with a smile and tried to engage with them. The strange thing was, he didn't ask anyone for money, a job, food, or clothes. He genuinely looked like he just wanted to speak to somebody. One day, Tracy couldn't ignore her feelings anymore. More than anything else, Tracy wanted to help the homeless man. But she had no money to give him. All of it went to her studies and rent. Since she made and ate most of her meals at the restaurant, a perk of her job, she didn't even have extra food to give him. But she knew what she wanted to do. The only problem was her boss, who wouldn't even permit her to give him food scraps. Tracy wanted her kind gesture to be a labor of love. She couldn't give him money, but there was one thing that only she could do for him. Since she was an aspiring chef, it made sense to put her skills to use and show the homeless man that someone cared enough to make him a meal. Tracy planned on borrowing a few ingredients from the restaurant stores and replacing them when she got her paycheck. She wanted the homeless man to taste something luxurious, something he had never tasted before. If she was caught stealing before she could replace what she'd taken, she could be fired or arrested. Her boss wouldn't even think twice. But now that the idea was firmly in her head, there was no going back. Tracy made sure her boss was preoccupied with a busy lunch service before she enacted her plan. She could hear the frantic clattering of pots and pans as he barked orders and swore at his chef. It was now or never. She snuck into the pantry and selected 2 black truffles, a handful of fresh chanterelle mushrooms, eggs, and a bottle of Marcassin Chardonnay. She'd probably have to pick up a few more shifts so she could afford to replace them, but it would be worth it. Then, she heard her boss' voice. Tracy's heart began to pound out of her chest. Her boss was right outside, and she couldn't escape. If he saw what she had, it would all be over. She wasn't even allowed to be in here. She prepared for the worst. She'd be screamed at, fired on the spot, and possibly hauled to jail for stealing. Tracy's first instinct was to tuck her ill-gotten goods into her pockets and apron, but the bottle wouldn't fit. The neck hung out accusingly. Her eyes darted around, looking for somewhere to hide if her boss came in. She tried not to make a sound as she listened to his heavy footsteps. When she heard him walk away, she almost cried with relief. When she was sure he was gone, she dashed out the door. Tracy hid the expensive ingredients in a bag in her locker for the duration of her shift. When it was finally over, she couldn't get out of the restaurant fast enough. As she lovingly fried the chanterelle mushrooms and kneaded the pasta dough in her apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about what the homeless man's face would look like when she presented him with the meal. Little did she know, the man hadn't been entirely truthful to her. Tracy plated up the homemade pasta and shaved the black truffles on top. She got out a crystal wine glass and packed everything neatly in a basket. Tonight, the homeless man would eat like a king. Her heart fluttered as she rounded the corner, but she was relieved to see that the man was still there. "I'm Tracy," and nervous Tracy smiled at the man. This close, she could see that he was of Middle Eastern descent. She thought stealing the ingredients from the restaurant was hard enough. Approaching and talking to him was more challenging. Still, she'd pressed on. She was too far in to give up now. Little did she know the kind of trouble she was brewing for herself. The man returned Tracy's greeting, but he was more pleasant than she could ever imagine. He asked her how her night and commute to work that morning were. He even complimented her on her dress, but behind his smile and compliments was a secret that would shatter Tracy's world. Tracy told the man about her experience at the restaurant, stating that she'd seen the man outside for weeks. She couldn't handle the thought of him being alone here, so she wanted to help. She presented her basket and showed the man its contents. The disbelief in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. The man couldn't believe what was going on. He asked over and over again if the food was his. When Tracy said yes, he dug in, savoring everything she had cooked for him. He started with the wine, taking a whiff from the glass before swirling it around and sipping. He swooshed it inside his mouth for a few seconds and swallowed, but then he did the unexpected. The man ate the food in the most refined manner Tracy had ever seen. He even wiped his mouth before talking to her, and each word he spoke showed that he was a different man from what he was letting on. The man ate each bite with closed eyes, smiling and grinning. He complimented Tracy's cooking, telling her it had been a while since he tasted such good food. But there was more. He commented on Tracy's ingredients, telling her what she could have used more or less. He even had something to say about her wine pairing, terming it a perfect choice for such a meal. When he was done, Tracy packed up everything and hurried into the restaurant. But as she finished up the rest of her shift, she couldn't help but think about how different the man was. Her need to help was quickly replaced by a burning curiosity. Tracy finished her shift and got ready to head home. But before doing that, she spent a few minutes asking her colleagues if they knew anything about the homeless man outside. None of her workmates had ever interacted with the man. Some of them didn't even know that a homeless man sat across from their place of work. This was disheartening. With no information forthcoming, Tracy counted her losses and let the topic go. Still, she made sure to do another run in the restaurant's store, grabbing a few supplies for her next masterpiece. Walking out of the restaurant, she found the man sitting in his spot. With a quick goodbye, she hurried home, ready to start the night. The night was busy for Tracy, who, after reaching her house, took a quick shower and started preparing her meals. For her dinner, she went with a simple ramen bowl, throwing in her favorite condiments to create the explosive flavor she was going for. After dinner, she cleaned up the kitchen and laid out the ingredients she'd brought from the restaurant. For Tracy's next project, she wanted to make the ultimate beef Wellington with red wine gravy. Laid before her were slices of prosciutto, chestnut mushrooms, beef fillet, flour, eggs, red wine, and olive oil, all of which she'd taken from the restaurant. She grabbed the rest of the needed ingredients, a roasting tray, and a food processor. She was about to have some fun in her kitchen. If the man ate like a king during the day, she'd ensure he ate like an emperor the following day. After toiling in the kitchen for hours, Tracy finally went to bed. Her apartment was blanketed by the most savory and sweet aroma she'd ever experienced. She couldn't wait for the man to taste her food. As before, she packed the food neatly in her basket, including broccolini she'd spent the morning roasting. She spent 30 minutes at her post before going for lunch. With a lovely smile, she carried her basket to the homeless man. He waved at her as she approached, clearly happy to see her again. He couldn't believe that she'd brought food for him again. He received it with his smile holding fast and even asked if she could join him this time. Tracy had never thought about eating the meal she made for the man with him. Yet she knew the only thing more heartwarming than cooking for someone was sharing the meal with them. She nodded eagerly. He gasped as the sweet aroma hit his nose, eternally thankful for all Tracy did for him. But like before, his whole demeanor would change as soon as the food touched his mouth. The man before Tracy was no longer homeless. His mannerisms were completely different, from how he held his cutlery to how he drank from his glass. But although he seemed different, the kindness in his eyes never wavered. As he had the previous day, he held conversations with Tracy that made him question everything she thought she knew about him. Today, the man asked about Tracy's dreams and aspirations. She told him that she wanted to make food that people would eat and smile. She wanted to bring joy into the world with her cooking. The man said he expected her to say she wanted to become a celebrated chef or something across those lines. He told her she had what it took to make that dream a reality. So why didn't she want it? Tracy shared that although most chefs were passionate about food, the fame got to their heads, and they forgot what made them follow that path in the first place. Although she saw nothing wrong with being a celebrated chef, it had never been in her cards. "I'd rather own a food cart that serves everyone at an affordable price than a 5-star restaurant that bars people from enjoying the food," she smiled. "You are rare, Tracy," he said mid-chew. His lips curled as he swallowed the food. "I have never met someone like you." Their conversations always went down that path, with Tracy surprising the man with her answers, and the man smiling before saying she was rare. As for Tracy, she'd spend the rest of the week stealing ingredients and feeding him. But each time she did so, her mind would race with questions. With each meal Tracy offered, the homeless man displayed an expert's finesse in fine dining, sparking her curiosity. Who was he? This wasn't an ordinary man. One evening after her shift, she confronted him. He finally opened up, revealing he was once an influential man overseas, wealthy but unfulfilled. Leaving it all behind, he sought a simpler life, finding solace in anonymity. "You're the only one who approached me willingly, even using costly ingredients," he said. Then he proposed an idea, a restaurant dedicated to feeding the needy, funded by his resources. Stunned, Tracy agreed but knew she had to confess to her boss about taking supplies. The next day, as she prepared for the worst, a convoy of luxury SUVs arrived. The man, now clean and surrounded by an entourage, asked for her by name, inviting her to spread kindness to the world. She accepted, calling on her close colleagues to join her. Together they walked into a new chapter, leaving her boss speechless. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another unbelievable tale like this one.